is love. Love. Love is all you need. There you go. For Valentine's Day, for all you lovers out there. And for all you who wish you were lovers. Your day's coming. It's right. Okay. So, we need to have a couple minutes about Valentine's Day. All you need is love. Because it actually has a fair amount of historical basis. Somewhat of a historical basis. So, everything's about history here. So, well, sort of. Everything is history, right? If it happened, it's history, right? So it's history. Originally, right around if you're wondering why Valentine's Day is on the 14th of February, it's because Valentine's Day is celebrated around the Ides of February by the Romans, and this is called the Feast of the Lupercalia. The Lupercalia is one of the weirder Roman festivals, which is saying something because Roman festivals are, by and large, relatively weird. So, at the Feast of the Lupercalia, you would have these are men, which usually Roman festivals are celebrated by priestesses, but occasionally you have priests, and you have priests in this case. These are the feasts. These are the two Lupercal. These would be two youngish men who were selected as the Lupercal. And in the Lupercalia, which is celebrated on or about the 14th of February every year, this is a festival of blood sacrifice. Now, not human sacrifice. Okay, that's not a Roman thing. The Romans didn't do that. Okay. But it is still a bloodshed. I mean, it's always a burnt offering sacrifice, right? Everybody's doing burnt offering sacrifices in the world right at this point, except maybe the Chinese. They're a little different. But everybody else is doing, it's true, they are a little different. But everybody else is doing burnt offering sacrifice. So this particular burnt offering sacrifice requires 2 goats and a dog. Yeah, Taya's like, and a dog? Yes, and a dog. All right, so 2 goats, not 3, 2. 2 goats and a dog. And you you tie the feet together, and then you lay the offering on the altar. Now, this is a big altar, so you can put all of these goats are not large, and dogs are not large, generally speaking. So you layer them on the altar, and then you slit their throats, and they bleed out. Okay, this is normal procedure. If you're sacrificing something really big, like an ox, you have a big outdoor sort of theater where you do this. But this would probably have been indoors. Altars are not, okay, we have to talk about altars for a minute. Okay, so sacred altars are not what we normally think of. Most of you, when I say the word altar, you're probably thinking of something that looks kind of like the sacrament table, or some of you will have been to temple open houses or whatever, where you see the altars or whatever, and they're, sort of, like pillars, but wide rectangular pillars of stone with a flat stone top. Depends on the kind of altar for whatever it is that you're doing. If you are going to do burnt sacrifice on the altar, then you can't have a solid stone top. Yeah, it does sound like the beginning of a joke, doesn't it? So 2 goats and a dog will walk into a bar. No, okay, so I don't know that joke. So anyway, if there is one. So the top of the altar would not be solid. It would be perforated. Think of a barbecue grill, because that's actually what most ancient altars were, is barbecue grills, more or less. So you put the sacrifices on there, and you want them to be struggling, because a willing sacrifice is a bad sacrifice. That's not good. You want your You want your sacrifices to be struggling and unhappy. If you've ever spent any time around goats, tying their legs together is likely to make them unhappy pretty much just by itself, let alone when you take a big knife and slit their throats. They really don't like that. So you're likely to get, plus dogs are not really happy about that either. So you're likely to get an unwilling sacrifice. So that's good. That's a good thing. But then you want to so when you slit their throats, the blood runs down inside the altar. They have there's like a drain underneath for this. You don't want it coming down the front of the altar and spilling onto the floor, and then people tread around in it and all of that. You don't want to do that. That's not good. So the top of it's perforated. Plus, inside the altar is it's kind of like a pilot light. You guys know what I'm talking about with that? So your water heaters have pilot lights. They're not on all the time. They just have a little light that ignites when it's time to heat up a bunch of water. So this is how the altar works. There's a little light inside, and there's fuel in there, but there's not a lot of oxygen getting to the fuel. So at the appropriate moment, when you raise your arms to heaven and say, "Oh, Jove, accept this sacrifice," then a little panel in the side of the altar, but where nobody can see it, opens up. Oxygen comes rushing in, and boom, it flares up, right? So Jove obviously has accepted your sacrifice, and for more on some of these tricks, please see Prince of Egypt, the DreamWorks film. Specifically the "You're Playing with the Big Boys Now" song, which is a really excellent song. That's about the Egyptian gods, but it works the same way. So people have been doing this forever, like essentially cheating by having the god flare up and accept the sacrifice by having the fire inside the altar. I'll explain why you want this in a minute, but first I have to jump back to the very first incidents of trash talking ever recorded in history that I am aware of, at least. This actually is even before the trash talking that happens at Thermopylae. Remember the Spartan 300 and the Persians are like, "When we fire our arrows, we are so many, they will blot out the sun." The Spartans yell back, "That's good because we like to fight in the shade." Basically calling insults back and forth to each other. Well, the first one that I know of is actually the prophet Elijah. Do you know this story? This is Elijah versus the priests of Baal in the Saturday Night SmackDown event of the century. Okay, so the priests of Baal has been a thorn in the side of Jehovah forever, since the Israelites got to the promised land. Finally, Elijah has had enough. This is Kings. I think this is in Kings. First or second Kings in the Old Testament. Anyway, so Elijah challenges the priests of Baal to a sacrifice off. I mean, I don't know what else to call it exactly, but that's what it is, right? Okay, you build an altar, I'll build an altar. You call on your God, I'll call on my God, and we'll see which one of us wins. Like, which God has the more impressive performance here. We'll test our gods. I don't recommend this on a regular basis, but it worked for Elijah. Anyway, so Elijah gets to go second. But here's the deal. You build your altars, and then you have to pour water over the top of them. This is so that the water will get down inside the altar, and if you have cheated by having a little a lighter or an oil lamp inside that's going to flare up and to burn all your, to make it, you're cheating. You can't cheat. You have to pour water over your altar so that it will put out anything that's inside. So if you're wondering when you read that why they're pouring water over their altar, that's why, because they usually cheat. Well, anyway, the priests of Baal pour the water over their altar, and then they do their little dance. They're whatever. I don't know what they do. And I'm not an initiate into the rites of Baal, so I don't know this stuff. But anyway, they do their thing, and nothing happens, of course. And Elijah is sort of sitting over on the side, with his arms folded, watching the proceedings, starts calling stuff out to them. He starts saying, well, maybe your God's asleep. You should yell louder. Maybe you should try to wake him up. But maybe your God's sleeping. And so they do. They yell louder. They're jumping around, cutting themselves, and flailing about it, whatever. Of course, nothing happens. Elijah's yelling at them. Well, maybe he's on vacation. Maybe he went on a trip somewhere, and he'll be back any minute. He just can't hear you. You got to yell louder. So anyway, at the end of the day, they're totally exhausted. They fall down. Nothing has happened. Their altar's just sitting there sogging. So Elijah's like, all right, my turn. Comes out, and he says, you know what? First, though, my altar isn't wet enough. We need to make this really wet. So pour some more buckets of water on top of the altar. So they pour more water on the altar until the altar is just like soggy. Okay, there's water running everywhere. They have a big trench around the altar, and it's filled up with water. Like it's sodden, right? So Elijah walks up to the altar, and he basically says, oh God, please accept the sacrifice. And before he's even finished speaking, fire rains down from heaven. Now, I don't know what this looked like, but I sort of have this, in the movies have these meteors that come firing through the atmosphere and this huge flame tails. So that's what I'm imagining here. Because the fire comes down, it eats up the sacrifice, the wood under the sacrifice, the altar, and all the water in the trench. This is a crater when he's done. Okay, it's that. God's like, yeah, watch this. Blam. And there's this crater, and then all the people are like, God wins, right? Kill all the priests of Baal. And then they carry them down to the creek and kill them all. But that part's not terribly important. Anyway, so I told you that story so I can tell you this one. Anyway, so you get back to the Lupercalia, right? So they get to the Lupercalia, and you slit the throats of the things, and then you go, oh, Jove, accept the sacrifice. I'm sure it's a longish prayer because you don't get to do this that often. So then you say your prayer, and then, oh, look, the flame comes up and starts burning your sacrifice. Here's why. You're going to eat it later, but you don't skin it. The sacrifice, remember, it's live when it goes onto the altar. So the fire cooks the meat inside the skin and fur and whatever. So then you need a big flame to burn all that stuff. So then when it's done, you peel off the skin. It's charred, you peel off the skin and eat the meat, which is perfectly cooked inside. You don't have to mess around with any of the hair. You don't have to skin anything. You don't have to do that. So that works pretty well. But for the Lupercalia, there's a couple of oddities. That's a normal sacrifice. But for this one, you slit the throats of the sacrifices. They bleed. And then the two Lupercal walk up to the altar, and they bow very deeply and touch their foreheads to the altar to get blood on their forehead. And then they take the sacred knife that's been used for the sacrifice and wipe it across the flat of the blade across their forehead so they have blood coming down their face. And then they have to turn to the assembled throng and begin to laugh. I'm just telling you what the rite consists of. I'm not making this up. You have to begin to laugh. Now, I don't know what sort of laughter is required here. I'm sort of thinking, kind of the maniacal sort of, don't you think? That seems like that would be appropriate for this. Anyway, so then you do the laugh, and then the fire comes up, and then you eat the sacrifice later. Anyway, that's the Feast of the Lupercalia. When the Christians take over the Roman Empire, you can't have this crazy blooded priest laughing. I mean, you can't have this stuff, right? I mean, this is not going to work. So for the Christians, plus, by the way, there's lots of drinking because it's a Roman festival, so there's lots of drinking. Christians are really not into that kind of thing. The drinking thing, they're okay with that. But most of the rest of the sacrifice, they can't really do that. So they want to get rid of this, but people like the festival, especially the drinking. So they preserved the festival by pasting a feast day over the top of it. And the feast that they chose for this one is the Feast of St. Valentine. There really is a St. Valentine. He was a priest. Yay! Ruby Silverstar is here. Hooray, Elizabeth's here. You're just in time for me to talk about St. Valentine. So St. Valentine was a priest. In the time that he was a priest, there was an edict that went around that you could not, that Roman soldiers were not allowed to marry. This is, I guess, to keep them, battle hardened or something. This is really stupid, but whatever. Anyway, so there's a lot of stupid laws in the Roman Empire. So that's fine. You do what you got to do. You're an adult, make your decisions. So anyway, so Valentine was a priest, kind of out on the frontier of the Roman Empire. And this edict comes down, the soldiers are not allowed to marry. Well, he's a Christian priest, and so marriage is kind of a big deal. So he keeps marrying people. He just ignores the law and keeps marrying people. So they catch him at it, and they arrest him and put him in jail. And the jailer happens to have a daughter. Apparently, she's pretty cute. And Valentine fell in love with the daughter. And he wanted to marry her. But the jailer's like, dude, you're in jail for marrying people. It's not going to work. But after a little while, the jailer's daughter got sick. Not the one, apparently, that he was interested in, but a different one.
Mr. C.
Yeah, what?
So was he marrying people, like getting married to like a bunch of people?
No.
Or was he saying, okay, now you
No, he's performing the marriages. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
English is imprecise about that. Yes. Yes. So he's performing the marriages because he's a priest. So anyway, so the jailer's daughter gets really violently sick and she's going to die. And Valentine says, well, I'm a priest. Bring your daughter to me and I will bless her and see if she gets better. And so he brings his daughter to Valentine. He prays and blesses the daughter, and lo and behold, a miracle happens, and the daughter gets well. Well, now the jailer is like, dude, anything you want, what do I'm your dude, whatever you like. And he's like, well, okay, I really want to marry your daughter, but I don't know how to pull that off just yet. So will you carry these letters to her from me? And he starts writing love letters to his beloved. And this is where this is the origin of sending Valentines to people, is he sent these love letters out to his immortal beloved. And eventually they end up getting married, and then Valentine gets executed anyway because that's the way these things work. Because if you're going to become a Christian saint, it's a good idea to get killed, to be a martyr. So he got killed for disobeying the law of the government that you cannot perform marriages. Does that remind you of anything that we might recently have spent time perhaps acting out?
Nah.
Okay. Well,
Varying brothers.
It was a thought. Yeah. Well, anyway. Yeah, there's lots and lots of instances. Yeah, I can see that the Becks have Rachel Louise. She's waving at me.
Like the play we just did, where she wanted to bury her brother.
What's more important, the law of God or the law of man?
Oh, God.
Well, if you want to become a Christian saint, the law of God, yes, is much more important. Anyway, so anyway, so I like Valentine. I used to not like Valentine's Day, and then I learned all this history about St. Valentine, and now I'm like, okay, well, Valentine's Day is pretty cool. I don't know. The chocolate part is really good. I don't know about the rest of it. Abby's like, oh, yeah, that's right. You can play All You Need Is Love all you want, but all I need is chocolate. So anyway, so that's our little interlude on Valentine's Day. And now we're going to have a test. It's time
Say what now?
for what? We're going to have a test.
What are we testing on?
Well, you won't find out until we start the test. You can participate in this test in really any way that you like. You might want to get a piece of paper and just scribble some things down. This is I'm just curious here.
So I can do it while I'm sleeping?
I don't know. Can you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll see you in the morning.
All right.
Jetty, it's the morning.
Okay. Everybody ready? Okay. Here we go. All right. I have my list here, but I got to figure out what order I want to ask these questions. Okay. So, name question number 1. Wait, I better mark which ones I'm asking when, or I'm gonna regret it. Okay. Question number 1. Name 3 Greek cities of the classical period. This is the period of time that we are studying right now. Three cities of the classical period. Everybody ready? Good, good.
Why don't you tell me your answers first?
I'll tell you my
say
answers
mine.
second. Sorry. I'm wise to that game.
Okay.
Okay, so question number 2. In the classical Greek period, militarily, which was the greatest power? The one famous for its military prowess.
Wait, like a person or the rank?
I'm talking about the city. I'm talking about the Greek city-state that was the most militarily powerful. Famous for it, actually. It's really the only thing that city-state is famous for. That's a broad hint.
Mr. C,
What?
was it the Spartans?
Well, now how can I answer that without giving the answer away to everybody else? I can neither confirm nor deny. Question number 3.
You can neither confirm or deny without the secretary's approval.
Sure. Okay. Question number 3. At one point late in the classical period, a new military power, a new country threw off and defeated the historically great military power. What city-state was that? If you don't know any of the answers to any of these questions, that is okay. Don't worry about it. Then the entire Greek, like everybody that we think of as Greek, was conquered. Who did that conquering? The entire, like all of these Greek city-states that we're talking about, they were all, well, almost all, conquered by this dude and his country. I want to know the name of the dude. Yes, Evan?
So far, for the last couple answers, I have gotten the exact same thing.
That's
Is
fine.
there only like one each?
It's okay. No, those are multiples, and we will suss them out. You can also give me the region that this individual is king of, if you wish to. But I'm kind of looking for a name. And then this guy died and was succeeded by his son, who became an even greater king than he was.
There's a lot of Greek stories like that.
That's true. I want to know what his son's name is. And that'll probably do. We'll probably do for now. We may have reserved the right to continue this test at another time, a little later on. Okay, so I wanted to do this because I want to know exactly how detailed and how specific and how. I want to know what stories to tell you today. I want to know what you know. I have like 800 stories. I just finished reading a 600-page book about a 3-month period of the time that we're talking about. Okay, so one of the best books on the subject I've ever read. Okay, so let's go backward. Now we'll go through the answers. Who would like to tell me 3 cities from the classical Greek period? Abby, are you waving at me?
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I thought Rome, Marathon, and Athens.
Okay, Rome doesn't count because they're not part of the Greek. Rome's in Italy. But Athens is good. And Marathon is really more of just like a wide plain than it is like a city. But I love that you know that. That's good. And we got Athens. Give me a couple others. Come on, people.
Greece.
This was the easy question. Argos works. That works. That's not really in the classical period. That's really in the ancient Greek period, but that's okay.
Does Constantinople count?
No. Nor Istanbul. Istanbul, not Constantinople. No, it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. That's a great song. But no, they might be giants. No, that does not count. That's not in the classical period. That in the Roman period, that becomes important. At the point that we're talking about in Greece, there isn't really anything at Constantinople. Troy doesn't count because it's not Greek. Troy is a Phoenician city, and that's also in the ancient period. Thebes, however, does count. Well done, Isaac. Thebes does count. So we have Athens and Thebes. You're really missing, well, there's two like big obvious ones. You got one of them, but there's another one. Sparta's the other one. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, Sparta's the other one. But there's also Corinth, Megalopolis, and several others that are not really all that important. The big 3, well, 4. The big 4, based on our homework, yes. The big 4 are Athens, Sparta, Thebes, and Corinth. Those are really the big, like, most important ones to know and to pay attention to. Of those 4, we'll just go with the big 4 there. Of those 4, which one is like the militarily the most important, well, most known for its military prowess?
Sparta.
It is Sparta. Yeah, the Spartans are basically raised on the military from the beginning of their lives. They don't do much else. And that, they're really, those are the ones to pay the closest attention to. I'll pull up a map here. Well, let's pull up a map now. Take a look at. Here are the Greek city-states. Where's my thing? Other way. Down here, share. Booyah. There we go. Okay, so those are the major Greek city-states. We do have Argos on there. Mycenae is on there. Athens, Thebes, Delphi. Not really a city. Delphi is really much more of a just, that's where the oracle is. Corinth, as you see, sits right on the junction of the Peloponnese. This is called the Peloponnesus here. This is the peninsula here, on which Sparta is located. Athens is over here, and in between them is Corinth. Corinth sits, it's narrow enough that Corinth actually sits like on a hill in between, and it has a port on either side. So if you go to Corinth, now there's a canal there that goes through. You can, Corinth has ports on either side, which makes Corinth a very rich city, but not militarily terribly important. And Athens is very close to Thebes. Sparta is down here. When the Spartans come up, they always have to go through Corinth in order to get to Athens, which means that Corinth spends a lot of time going back and forth in terms of who their allies are. Does that make sense? So that's basic. Those are your basic ones there. Okay, so at the end of the classical period, the Spartans are overthrown militarily by whom? Abby?
Is it Alexander the Great?
No. Very good guess. Not the Persians. The Persians never managed to vanquish the classical Greeks. They had two big cracks at it, and they failed both times.
Rome?
Not Rome. Rome will eventually take out all of Greece, but this is a little bit later. It's not the Peloponnesians, it's the Thebans. Athens does all the writing, all the plays, all the cool architecture. Thebes is the only one of the Greek city-states that ever vanquishes the Spartans on the field of battle, at the Battle of Leuctra, which we will talk about in just a minute. But then the Thebans themselves are conquered, as are all of the Argives, all of the Greeks, by whom?
Romans.
Eventually. This is before that. Philip II of Macedon. Macedon, by the way, let me pull the map back up again. I'll show you where Macedon is. All right, so Macedon is up here by Mount Olympus. See that up here? This is where Macedon is. It's very mountainous. It's poor, except in mineral resources, which they mostly don't really know how to make much use of. The silver mines are, that's why, see all this orange here along the coast? This is where all your silver and gold mines are. That's why they have those. But they're from up here. They are, loosely speaking, Greek. They think of themselves as being Greek, but the Greeks do not think of them as being Greek. The Greeks think of them as barbarians. They have a kind of a funky accent. So Philip II is the one who conquers Thebes, Athens, not Sparta. So now I have to tell you a famous story about this. Well, relatively famous, but I think it's cool. So Philip develops this. Now I can't tell you that yet. We'll come back to that. Okay, last question. Philip has a son, and his son becomes even greater than he was, and who is his son?
Alexander the Great.
There's Alexander the Great. Okay, so there's your chain. First, it's Sparta. The Athenians had a big empire too, but it was mostly around on the coastland because the Athenians had a reasonable navy. Not great, but reasonable. The Spartans didn't care about the water at all. They didn't have a navy at all. But on land, the Spartans were the greatest for a couple hundred years. And then they were finally defeated by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra. Let me spell that for those of you who didn't bother to do the homework. This is one of the great battles of all time. The Spartans had conquered all of Greece. They exacted tribute from Corinth, from Athens, from Mycenae, from Thebes, from everybody. Well, the Thebans got mighty tired of having tribute exacted from them, and decided that they were not going to put up with that anymore. The problem is that the Spartans kick your butt every time you try to get away from them. This is a problem. So they had a general who decided he could figure out how to defeat the Spartans. This guy's name is Epaminondas. I know, you're like, what? Epaminondas? Yes, it didn't sound weird to them. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it did, and he was bullied in junior high, and so he learned to become tough. It's possible. I don't know. But Epaminondas decided that he could defeat the Spartan. And he had an idea about how to do this. We talked about, when I was there last time, we talked about how the Greek phalanx lines up. They have round shields, and they have spears that sit on the top. Your right hand, you hold a spear that sits on top of your shield, right? Well, it slides a lot because the shield is round, right? So it's hard to hold it steady. You can knock it sideways, and it's hard to hold it. You have to have enormous forearms to hold your spear up. Epaminondas, after one of the battles, apparently during one of the battles, this isn't written down, this is kind of a guess, but apparently during one of the battles, one of his shield men got his shield got hacked by, I don't know, somebody's axe or something, got a big notch in it. So you have the circle shield, but as a notch cut into it. And so what Epaminondas, the guy was like, it was way easier to hold my spear and just set it in a notch, and then nobody could knock it sideways. They couldn't knock it off the shield. So Epaminondas went around and cut notches in all of his spearmen's shields, so it made it easier to hold the shield. Plus, then you can use the shield to help you direct the thrust of your spear. You get more power that way. So that was one thing. Then he did something else. When he drilled his men, he would drill them and Greece is fairly far south, so it's pretty warm. And he would drill them all through the height of the summer in the hottest part of the day. And he would drill them for hours until just sweat is pouring off these guys and they're throwing up because they're exhausted and whatever. And he trained them by having the shield wall march forward into this row of boulders, this cliffside, and they would push on it. This is how ancient combat. You throw your spears, everybody shoots their arrows, your sling men throw all theirs, and then the armies rush forward and crash into each other. And then they push on each other, and whoever pushes the other guys back wins, because you got guys right behind you. You don't have any room to move your feet, right? So if you get pushed on off your feet, you'll fall over, and then it's like dominoes, like your whole army shatters, the wall of your army shatters. So nobody had ever shattered a Spartan shield wall. It's never happened. So, I mean, even the Persians couldn't do it, and they threw tens of thousands of guys against like 300 Spartans, and they couldn't move them. So he has them pushing on this cliff, and then he will sound a horn. And when he sounds the horn, what he's asking them for is one step. Give me one step. And they're supposed to push forward just one step. Now, they're pushing on a cliff wall. It's not really going to work, right? But when they're exhausted and sweat's pouring off of them and they can't even hardly stand up, he blows the horn and asks them to push forward just one step. Well, the Spartans come up The Spartans send their envoys to the Thebans and say, time for your tribute. And the Thebans are like, oh yeah, here's my tribute. Take that back to Sparta. I'm pretty sure it was like that actual gesture. Like that was what they did. And then, okay, no, probably not. All right. But anyway, they sent him back, with a sack of horse dung or something and said, here's our tribute. And so the Spartans are like, well, we'll see about that. So they come rolling up out of the Peloponnese, across Corinth, and into the plain of Leuctra, which is outside of Thebes. And here's the Thebans lined up on one side, and here are the Spartans lined up on the other side, facing each other, calling insults back and forth at each other. Your mama's fat. Oh, yeah? Well, your mama is so fat that she could eat my mama and still be hungry. And, whatever. I don't know.
Mama's so fat that Thanos had to snap twice.
There you go. I like that. That's probably what the insult they used. Anyway, so I'm sure that was it. So they're facing off against each other, and so the Spartans start to march forward, and the Thebans start to march forward, and there's just way more Spartans. So the Thebans are going to be in trouble because they're going to wrap their line. If you line them up and part of your line is longer than the other guy, they can wrap around you and start killing you from the side. Remember, you're not armored they're not wearing armor. They just have a shield, and they have a little bit of armor like on their shins to keep people from like stabbing them underneath their shield, but they don't have a lot of armor on. So if you get around to the side of them, you can just cut them to bits. So in order to keep that from happening, Epaminondas keeps sliding his line so they wrap, but they can't ever get to him because he keeps sliding his line. Finally, when they lock together, they're shoving on each other, and this is the great Spartans and the Thebans, and they're shoving on each other, grunting and swearing and all this kind of stuff, and they're stabbing at each other with their spears. And in the middle of the very hottest part of the battle, and they've been out there shoving on each other for an hour or more, finally Epaminondas blows the horn, and his guys have been trained for this. They hear the horn, and they push forward one step, and they actually shove the Spartans back, which no one's ever done. And the Spartan line cracks, and the Thebans rush into the gap and start slaughtering the Spartans, and they defeat, for the first time ever, the Spartans are defeated on the field of battle. Epaminondas is one of the great generals of the classical age. Practically nobody knows about this guy, which is weird because in the battle, he wasn't actually in the battle fighting. He would have been on the walls of Thebes watching what was happening down below him. But there was a set of hostages, not really hostages exactly, but like exchange of, this is kind of like a prisoner exchange. We're not going to attack you. You're not going to attack us because we have like 20 hostages from your country and you have like 20 hostages from our country. So they exchanged them. One of the kids that got exchanged was a kid named Philip. So Philip trained with Epaminondas. He trained with his army, and he started thinking about what happens when the armies come together. You have a spearman in the front, and the spear would have been about 6 feet long, roughly. And you stab at them, and they're stabbing at you, and whatever. And Philip's thinking, look at all of this in a phalanx. Only if it's like 6 feet long, only like the first 3 rows of guys can reach the enemies. Everybody else is just shoving. This doesn't sound very effective. What if you had a really long spear? So he starts thinking about this piece of technology. What if you could make your spears like really long, like 18 or 20 feet long? Well, then you're a bristling hedgehog of a formation. Now you've got like what, 3 or 4 times as many spearheads coming at you? The spearheads that he built are as long as my arm. These are the spearheads. These are fearsome weapons. It's called the sarissa. And Philip is the first one to develop this piece of military technology. and he equips his phalanx with these Sarisse, and they come down against the Thebans. And after he goes home, he's like, hey, we can take these guys. I trained with them. I know everything they do. We can take these guys. So he sends his army down there, and lo and behold, they vanquish the Thebans. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Philip has many wives. One of his favorites, for a while anyway, was an upcountry woman named Olympias. And Olympias is, by all accounts, incredibly beautiful, tall, but ferocious. Not a woman you want to get on the wrong side of. Philip is a drinker. He likes a woman, especially after battle, and doesn't really matter to him too much if he's married to her. He's a backcountry commander. He is the greatest military commander anybody has ever seen, but he's a drunkard, gets drunk a lot. At one particular, I'll get to that. So by Olympias, he has a son, and they name him Alexander. Alexander is a very common name in Greece, especially in Macedon. And Alexander, from the day he was born, was just different. He's just different. He doesn't play the same games that the other kids do. He doesn't grow up the way they do. He's never been real big. He's not a big kid. He's kind of small. He's blonde, which is a little weird for that area of the country. He's blonde, and he's beautiful. He is a handsome dude, but he's not tall. And that's a big part of, like, if you're very tall, then that's a thing that is of real importance in terms of royalty and in terms of military, that kind of thing. He's not very tall. Philip does not want Alexander to grow up to be a barbarian kid. He wants him to grow up to be educated and to be Greek, to be actual to what they would have called a Hellene. Because the Greek was called Hellas at the time. So if you were from, it still is, by the way, in Greek, the word for the country is Hellas. So these are Hellenes. He wanted Alexander to be a Hellene. He wanted him to be able to read and write, to understand poetry and plays and philosophy, and he needed a tutor. Really desperately needed to have a tutor for his kid, and there's nobody in his court who could possibly do the job. There's only one place to get a really great tutor. And where would that be? In ancient Greece. Taya said
Maybe
it.
the Oracle?
What?
Maybe the Oracle?
No, the Oracle doesn't really teach you anything. The Oracle mostly just makes obscure pronouncements, and you have to try to figure out what it means.
Athens?
Athens is the only place to go. It's the seat of learning. It's where they have the Lyceum, the house of learning. It's the only place to go. But if you're an Athenian, why would you ever go to Macedon? Like Macedon, this is sort of like, how do I describe this? When I talk about it in Utah, I always say it's like you live in Los Angeles and you're going to go become a tutor in Idaho. But that won't work for you. So how about Wyoming? So you're from Seattle, and you are from the University of, you're a doctor you're the head of a department at the University of Washington, and you're going to go and teach at Casper Community College in Wyoming. Why would you ever do that? You would never, nobody would do that. Except so there's this exchange of, so Philip sends down to Athens, he sends his messengers down to Athens, and the guy that he wants is one of the greatest philosophers of all time. Remember, Socrates is dead. Plato is probably also dead, but there's a third guy who is maybe even more famous than all those guys. And he wants this guy to come and be a tutor. So he sends his men to, does anybody know who this is?
Come to me, and together we can rule the galaxies.
Kind of, yeah. Kind of like, that's a little creepy, but yes. So you have Plato, Socrates, and who's the third guy? Starts with an A. You know this guy.
Clearly, he's a guy.
You know this guy.
Yes. But do you?
Aristotle.
It's Aristotle. Thank you. Yes.
What she said.
Starts with an A, ends with Aristotle. Okay, so yeah, Aristotle. So he goes to they go to Aristotle's house, and Aristotle says, "Come on, there's no way." And they say, "You're sure? You're sure you won't? Sure you won't come?" And he says, "Yep, I'm sure I won't come." And so the messenger says, "Well, okay. Before I leave, though, is there anything like a gift that you'd like to send to your grandmother?" And Aristotle says, "Why would I send a gift to my grandmother with you?" And they said, "Because she's in Macedon. Remember that town you grew up in? It ain't there no more." And Aristotle says, "You know, the one thing I've always wished I could do with my life is go to Macedon and teach some kid. Please let me do that." So he goes to Macedon. He said, "But here's my price. My price is you have to rebuild my city and send my grandma home." So Philip does. Philip rebuilds his city and sends grandma back home. And Aristotle comes up to the court and becomes Alexander's tutor. And he tutors him in everything except military strategy. The military strategy, Philip takes care of himself. Philip's pretty sure he knows how to teach a kid how to do this stuff. And it turns out he's right. But Alexander becomes far more than just a general. He understands philosophy, geography. He speaks more than one language. He is a very educated kid. He learns how to speak Greek without a Macedonian accent. So a Macedonian accent to us would sound kind of like this. Somebody comes to you and says, "Now, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put our army together, then we're going down, and we're going to slaughter all them people. We're going to take over the world."
So the country.
Yeah. It isn't the most intelligent sounding accent. And the Hellenes are like the Macedonians. They're all stupid. They're thugs and ruffians. There's no way they're going to be able to do anything like that. So Alexander has to learn how to speak without that accent. And he learns to do that. At Chaeronea, Philip is like, "You know what? I'm tired of just ruling Macedon. I want to rule all of Greece." So he heads down for Thebes, which is on the map the closest place to go. Heads down to Thebes, and the Thebans send out their sacred band. The Thebans have these 300 warriors called the Sacred Band. They are pairs of warriors, and they are pledged eternally to each other. They are the closest of friends. They are total BFFs, and they fight for each other in pairs. They fight. The Sacred Band has never been defeated.
The first bromances.
Yes, well, not the first ones, but definitely these are like some very high-level bromances. Very, very good, yes. So when they get to Chaeronea, I'll have to spell that one too. Oops, missed the end. When they get to Chaeronea, Philip lines up his army, and these guys are these enormous 18, 20-foot ash spears, the Saracen, and they're pretty formidable kind of. Do I have a? think I have a picture, a really good, of what it would look like coming at you.
With like the spears in front, and then they slowly like go up, and like
Yeah.
Joshy has it right there.
Oh, you got that, Josh?
You have the picture right in here in the homeworks. Right there.
Oh, did I put it in the homework? There we go.
Look on Joshy's screen for visual.
There you go. This is one of the better pictures of it, this one right here. So this is what the Macedonian phalanx looks like. When it comes at you. I mean, you can just sort of imagine what, good heavens, man, trying to face something like this. I mean, it's like a forest of spears. How do you charge something like that? And the answer is you kind of don't. Anyway, so the Macedonians line up there, they put their line, and Philip arrays his line, and he puts Alexander on the part of his line directly opposite the sacred band. So he's committing his son to the troops that are going to take on the roughest, toughest group on the other side. Well, they win at Chaeronea. They slaughter the Thebans and the Athenians, who sent up troops as well. They slaughter the sacred band, all 300 of them, wipe them out. And then they take over and exact tribute from everybody. And Philip sends a messenger to Sparta. And the Spartans did not come to the battle. The Spartans are like, we don't care about these people. It doesn't matter. Nobody's going to come and get us anyway. So he sends a messenger to the Spartans, and he says, I'll give you a choice. Would you like to come and pay tribute to me, or would you like me to come and get it? And the Spartans send back one word. Neither. That's it. Spartans are also called, for those of you who are English geeks, here's some great stuff. The Spartans are also called Laconians, because the area of the land that they live on is called Laconia. So these are Laconians. There's an English word, laconic. It is a terrific word, and you should learn it. Laconic means I can't be bothered to bestir myself to more than the absolute minimum level of response to you. This is not because I'm disinterested. It's not because I'm afraid. It's not because I'm lazy. But I don't respect you enough to bestir myself to even really get excited about this. They didn't send back a paragraph. They sent one word. That's a laconic answer. They said neither. So Philip is incensed by this, and he sends them back another message that says, listen, if I come to Laconia, I will slaughter your women and children. I will raze your cities to the ground. I will burn your fields. I will destroy you utterly.
Sure you will.
No. One word. Even shorter. If. The Spartans respond with, if. Philip never goes. He never goes to Laconia, never attacks the Spartans. He leaves them alone. Yay, Josie. Spartans stay on their little part of the world, and they never interact. So anyway, Philip is now master of all of Greece. And unfortunately, so he is planning to assault, to go after the Persians. He's planning to take his troops and head off to the Persians. At one drunken party, famous scene, at one of these drunken parties, one of his wives is giving birth to, as it turns out, a girl, but they're toasting the birth of this child. And Philip says something like, one of his generals, one of his guys says, "Let us drink to a full blood heir." Alexander's sitting right there, and Alexander's like, "What am I, chopped liver?" And his father, so he's insulted the host. And so Philip gets super angry with him and stands up to come over and slap him or whatever. But he's so drunk that he trips over his own robe and falls in the middle of the thing, spills wine everywhere, and he's sort of lying there on the ground drunk. And Alexander looks down at him and says, "There is a man who wants to bestride 2 nations, overturned, bestriding from one couch to another." Now, Alexander is also a drinker, but that becomes worse later on in his life. Philip dies shortly thereafter. He is stabbed to death at what is supposed to be a wedding of one of his children. He's stabbed to death by a member of his companion guard, a man named Pausanias. Pausanias stabs him to death. Now, there is all kinds of speculation about whether Alexander bribed Pausanias to stab Philip to death so that Alexander could take over. There is no evidence that he did that. But there's no way to prove it one way or the other. Personally, I don't think he did. But I admit that one of the reasons I don't think he did is I happen to really like Alexander, which is not a reason. Philip is stabbed to death by Pausanias, and Alexander takes over. Pretty much right away, everybody rises up in revolt. Alexander is 20. He's not married. He's more of an Athenian. He doesn't even grow a beard. So he looks like he's 12. He looks like the kid who sacks your groceries at the local grocery store. I mean, he does not look like a commander. He's pretty enough. And he's killed enough people. I mean, he's definitely, he's no slouch, but he's so young, nobody can really take him seriously. He takes the army down to Thebes just to make sure that all the Greeks are still cool. The Greek orator Demosthenes is preaching revolt against Philip and revolt against Alexander, but the Athenians, everybody pledges their loyalty. Yeah, we'll keep the same terms that we had when your dad was running things. Don't worry about us. Well, yeah, but then winter comes and all of the tribes up here in the north of Macedon, all those tribes revolt. They're up in the hills. It's winter. Nobody's going to come up there and get them. Yeah. This isn't Philip. This is Alexander. Nobody figured you would ever... Philip was the greatest general anyone had ever seen or heard of. That kind of guy comes along once in a lifetime. Or so they thought. Well, Alexander takes his troops up into the mountains. He doesn't care that it's cold, and neither do his troops. They fall on these tribes that declared their independence when they can't believe anybody could possibly be invading them. They don't even have lookouts posted. No one's going to come there. It's snowy. It's cold. Everybody's going to, it's the time of starving because, nothing's growing because it's winter. Who's going to take his army into that? Well, Alexander is going to take his army into that. And he whips their butts, one side and the other. He destroys them everywhere he goes. They roll rocks down the hills. Alexander teaches his phalanxes to step sideways and let the rocks roll in between their ranks. He teaches them to crouch down underneath their shields to make a ramp and the rocks come down the hill, and they roll up the shields and go flying over the rest of his army. And then they come back out from under their shields, charge up the hill, and slaughter everybody. But he's gone for a long time. Look, there's no telephones, okay? He can't just call home and say, yep, well, we whooped the Triboloi today, so we'll be home in a month. No, he can't tell anybody. Everybody thinks he went up in the mountains in the winter, and everybody knows when you do that, you're dead. So the Thebans and the Athenians revolt. They get their allies, the Illyrians, who live over here on this part of the peninsula, to agree to ambush Alexander as he marches, if he's still alive, to ambush Alexander as he marches his army south. Come running out of hills and ambush him. It actually works. They trap Alexander in a valley in between a fortress and a ring of hills where he can't get out. Alexander, which may be the first time and maybe the only time in his entire military career, finds that he's made a mistake. He's trapped between a fortress that he can't really assault and a pretty numerous army arrayed on the high ground that's really hard to get his phalanx to go up the hill to get these guys. So Alexander, and they have no food because they were figuring that what they would do is they'd march in here, they would take over the area, and then they would eat all the food that was stored up. Well, these guys burned it all. So there was nothing to eat. So Alexander can't stay there or his troops will run out of food. He only has 3 days. So he takes a half a day and marches his men around in parade formation. They do all sorts of drills and formations. They form up into the phalanx, and then they twists in on itself. And all his fancy parade ground maneuvers, which all these guys up on the hills, they're all watching. Then he has them form into an arrowhead and like a spear aimed right up the hill and start marching up the hill. Everybody on the hillside runs away screaming. They've been watching these guys drill all day. There's helmets shining in the sun, and they're terrified, and they just run away. The guys in the fortress see these dudes run away on the hillside, and they set fire to the fortress and run away. Alexander loses 0 men. 0. It's a 30-day march from this area up here where the Illyrians are down to Thebes. It's a 30-day march. Alexander's troops make it in 12. He always shows up where you don't expect him to be. His troops are always faster than you expect. Well, they get there, and the Thebans have slaughtered his generals that were in the garrison there and walled up the garrison in the center fortress of the town. When Alexander arrives, they're using a battering ram to assault this fortress. Alexander draws his army up. He says, I'm here. You pledged your honor. I hold you to your treaty. And the Thebans are like, oh, yeah? Here's our response to that. Come and get us. And so Alexander is like, okay. And he goes and gets them. He really doesn't want to have to do this again. So when they break through the walls of Thebes, they start slaughtering people. They slaughter most of the army. When he's done, the entire outer wall is destroyed. And he calls the tribes around Thebes. There's a ring of tribes around Thebes that have been subjugated by the Thebans for a century. And he says to them, what should we do with this city? And they said, if you turn your back on the Thebans, they'll just stab you. The only thing to do is to destroy the city. So Alexander says, okay. And they destroy the city so thoroughly that we don't actually know where it was. So then Alexander sends an envoy to the Athenians and says, it seems to me like a really great time to visit southern Greece. And the Athenians send back gold, silver, everything they have, and say, you know what? it's terrible down here, right? You don't want to come here. Why don't we send a whole bunch of troops and you can go and invade Persia? And Alexander says, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So he doesn't actually invade Athens, or we wouldn't know anything about Athens because he would have destroyed it utterly like he did with Thebes. He sends a messenger to the Spartans, basically saying, we don't know what. We don't know what the messenger said. We don't have the letter. The Spartans do not respond that we know of, and Alexander leaves them alone. We don't know why. He just never goes to Sparta. It's the only town ever to defy Alexander and get away with it. Because now
Following
Alexander...
father's footsteps.
What?
Following in his father's footsteps.
Kind of, yeah. He did not, there was no debate this time. He just left him. No, we don't know why. Nobody else defied Alexander ever and got away with it. Nobody. Okay, so now Alexander is in command of all of the Greek forces, and he's ready to march on the Persian Empire. The Persians know he's coming. They have these orange spots over here by the Persian Empire. They've taken over these, and they're aware of what's going on in Greece. They know what's happening. In fact, most of these places right here have revolted and gone over to fight with the Persians. Alexander, how many of you read the stuff that I sent you about the campaign of Alexander that I paraphrased from Arrian? Sad. That's too bad. I'm glad, better bestest student, that you read those. So Alexander has a number of battles while he is in the process of subjugating the world. Let's see, where's a map that will do us justice here? How about this one? This is a pretty good one. Okay, that whole thing that we've been talking about now for the last hour all took place right here. Alexander is now going to conquer an area that is roughly 40 times as big. He starts here in Macedon and he marches over here. They cross the Hellespont and come over into Asia. Up, down, sideways. Remember, did I send you guys the Gordian knot story? No? Okay. I don't have time to tell you that story. I'll have to send it to you again. In all these campaigns, Alexander is never defeated. He never loses a battle, ever. Every time he engages, he wins. There are no exceptions. It doesn't matter how impregnable your fortress is. It doesn't matter how awesome your troops are. It doesn't matter if you have elephants. It doesn't matter what you have. It is irrelevant. Alexander defeats you every single time. He is never defeated. If you happen to have an island fortress, like right down here is a fortress. Yes, we had it at 11. If you have an island fortress like Tyre, yeah, here's a pretty good example of this. Pretty good map. Here is Tyre. Tyre is an island city. It's a Phoenician city. Alexander does not have a lot of ships, and his sailors are not. He doesn't do water. Basically, it's entirely a landborne campaign. Well, this island fortress here in the Mediterranean basically says, you know what? You can't come and get us. We have great ships and a great navy, and your army can't come and get us. So neener, neener. Never say that to Alexander. Never. So Alexander, over the course of about 7 months, takes his army and builds a bridge, not a wooden bridge, a 60-foot wide, like earthen ramp called a mole that he builds to connect this city to the mainland so he can march over there, crash through their walls, and destroy them. How invincible is this dude? Okay, take a good look at this map. I have a different one to show you. This is what it looks like now. Alexander the Great changed the geography of the planet to destroy this city. That's what it looks like now. Here's like a sort of a time map of this. It's a peninsula, people. It's not even an island anymore. They're hanging out on their island thinking, oh, this is fine. It's no problem. Alexander can't come and get to us. Oh, yeah? Here's a satellite map. He fixed it by making it not an island anymore. And then he marched over there and slaughtered people. And then you're like, ah! Okay, when he does this, Babylon, which is like one of the great military cities, right? Babylon is this huge, here's another one. Landmass formed from Alexander's bridge. Okay, he just said, okay, well, you're not an island anymore. Babylon had walls that were 30 feet high and 12 feet thick. When they heard about this, they threw their gates open and said, come on in. Because you can't stop this guy. If he wants your city, he's going to get your city. There is nothing you can do. People tried everything. The first two battles that he fights against Darius, this is Darius, I think it's the second. I'm not sure. Too late to be known as Darius the first, he'll surely be known as Darius the worst. I think this is Darius the second. In the first battle, Darius doesn't even bother to come. I think this is Issus. It's possible that it's Granicus, but I think it's Issus. So Darius doesn't even bother to come in Persia. Doesn't even bother. He's like, you guys can chase away this Macedonian barbarian. I don't even have to pay attention. Yes, thank you. That is a Robin Hood reference. That's right. Okay, so he doesn't even come. Alexander faces off again across a river against this sort of rampart. This kind of a high, there's a flat plain, and then the river, and then like a hill. And everybody's up on the hillside. The hill kind of slopes away like this. And all of his generals are like, well, we can't attack up the hill, so let's go around to the sides. Let's attack them on the sides. He says, no, that's where their best troops are. They say, well, how do you know that? And he says, because if you were defending your position, where would you put your worst troops? And they said, oh, like up the hill where they have the strongest defensive position. He's like, right, so that's where we're going. And Alexander polishes up his armor so that it like gleams and everybody in the world knows exactly where he is. And then he leads his companions across the river and up the hill. Well, they shatter the enemy and drive them off. Okay, so down a little bit later, at the Granicus, possibly it's Issus. I can't remember which one's first, which one's second. Anyway, this time Darius is there. And he's like, okay, enough of this foolishness. We're going to take these guys. He's got about a 5-to-1 advantage in personnel. Doesn't matter. Alexander slaughters them. he uses innovative techniques, stuff nobody's ever seen. His cavalry appears out of nowhere. He uses the terrain better than anybody else. He knows exactly where to put his guys. They're drilled to the point where they can do anything he asks them to do. They're the proudest and the best soldiers in the world. He drives them up. Darius, he cracks Darius's line right where Darius is. So Darius runs away with like anybody who can get on a horse. He leaves all of his baggage. He leaves all of his treasury. He leaves his wife and his mother-in-law. Now, Alexander is not a kind and gentle dude. Have you got that from what we've talked about so far? He's not really a kind and gentle dude, except to women. He treats women with great respect. He treats this, Darius's wife is reputed to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Alexander does not lay a hand on her. In fact, he sends a sends a messenger to the camp and says, you will not be molested. In fact, you can take all your baggage, keep all your jewels, keep your tents, keep your ladies in waiting and everything. You will not be molested. You're under my personal protection. But you are coming with me. So Alexander keeps them, but he doesn't molest them. He doesn't normally you slaughter the women you don't like, you rape the other ones and then slaughter them, and you hold them for ransom or whatever. Well, Alexander doesn't do any of that. He lets them keep their tents, all their slaves, their attendants, all their jewels, everything. Lets them keep everything. At the Battle of Gaugamela, and I have to spell that one because once again we're into really weird words here. This is in Iraq. At the Battle of Gaugamela, this is the last major battle that Alexander fights against the Persian Empire. There are lots of other battles after this with little tribes, but this is like the main body. Eyewitness reports put the Persian army at about 1 million people. That's impossible. There's no way they can have been that many, but there were hundreds of thousands. For the first time, Darius got there first and was able to prepare the ground. He has prepared it with pits and traps, with stakes in the ground to stop the phalanx from marching forward. Better, he has cleared the ground of all obstacles so that his chariots can have room to maneuver. His chariots are his most fearsome weapon. They're drawn by 2 horses. They're big, heavy war chariots with armored horses. And on the sides, sticking out of the chariot, I wonder if I can find a sized chariot picture. They have these wicked knives sticking out from the sides of their chariots that spin. So when they come at you, they run into your phalanx. The horses crash through the front because I don't care how strong you are. When a pair of horses crash into your front, you go down. And then the blades just chew everybody up on the side. And so this has been a very effective military tactic, and he set up the ground so that it's perfect for his army to maneuver and for his chariots to do their thing. Okay, so yeah, here's an example. It's a 4-horse chariot with this big blade sticking out the side. They're pretty fearsome weapons. And he set it up so that Alexander, when he gets his phalanx, locked together out there, he's just going to roll the chariots at them and roll right over them. Sort of like sending tanks at massed infantry. Alexander draws his troops up, puts them in the phalanx formation exactly the same way he always does. Darius is like, I got this guy now. Here we go. And he sends his chariots in this big wall. He sends his chariots at Alexander's phalanx. Alexander's phalanx then executes a move that has never been seen before on the battlefield because you just can't do it. You have to have your troops so tightly disciplined to make this work. Oh, here. I was going to share that so you could see what the size chariot looks like. You have to have your troops so tightly disciplined. Here you go. Here's an example. It's a 4-horse chariot here. Yeah, see how the curved blades here? This is kind of cartoonish. Nobody really used one. That's way too big of a chariot. But you'd have these wicked curved blades sticking out the side. And these things, I mean, the horses are armored. They're huge and heavy. Here's sort of what it looks like coming at you. This is a nasty weapon. So Alexander executes a maneuver that nobody's ever seen on the battlefield before. Remember, the phalanx is locked together. You have a wall in front, shields locked, overlapping with each other, and then behind them, they're staggered so that the spear of the second rank comes over the top of you. And then behind them, back again into the, so this phalanx is sort of overlapping, like overlapping plates. The chariots come rolling at Alexander's troops, and his army does this. The phalanx pivots and opens up. And the chariots go right through without hitting anybody. Nobody can do this. Like, nobody's troops can pull this maneuver off. Well, once the chariot's gone through, you might notice when looking at a chariot that all the armor's in the front. So as soon as the chariot goes by, your guys run along behind and throw spears into the back of the charioteers or grab them and drag them off or whatever. They just slaughter all of Darius's chariots. Then the formation flips back forward again and they're back in the phalanx. Nobody can do this. But Alexander's men can do it. And they, again, drive off Darius's people. Before the battle starts, just as, you know, there's a sort of negotiation, Darius sends his messengers to Alexander and says, hey, I understand you have my wife and my mother-in-law. Here's a baggage train full of treasure. Will you accept that in exchange? And Alexander says, sure, but you have to ask the women. I'm not going to make the call. You're going to have to go talk to them. So the Persian guys come and says, we're here to liberate you. And they're like, go away. Alexander treats us better than you ever did. We're not going back. So they don't. They don't go back. Which turns out to be a good deal because Alexander routs them at Gaugamela again, wipes out most of the army. Darius once again runs away, and a couple weeks later, he will be slaughtered by his own men. Another of my favorite Alexander stories, when Alexander's chasing Darius to try to get to him, and a guy, they finally catch up with them, and the camp opens up, and these guys, this messenger group comes out holding a sack, and he throws it at Alexander's feet. This is a guy named Bessus, is his name. And he throws it at Alexander's feet and says, here is the head of the king. I killed him for you. And Alexander says words to this effect, seize that man and put his head next to the man he once swore loyalty to. Alexander doesn't do disloyalty. He's not big on that. So the guy who turned traitor and killed Darius, far from rewarding him, he has him slaughtered because he's a traitor to his king. I like this guy in a lot of ways. I really like this guy. There are so many other stories that I do not have time to tell you about. I do not have time to tell you about the taking of the Sogdian Rock. That story is crazy.
I'm pretty sure after this, I'm going to be looking at the stories myself.
You should do that. I do not have time to tell you about the taking of the Sogdian Rock. I do not have time to tell you about the battle of, what's the river? The battle at the Indus River, where Alexander figured out how to, all right, I have to tell you this. Horses and elephants don't mix. Horses do not like elephants. Sogdian Rock, yes, that's it, Isaac. They don't mix. So when you have horses, if you have elephants, and Alexander, where's that map again? Where Alexander went all the way down into India. I don't know if you've thought about what it would be like to try to walk from Greece to India, but it's far. It's like super far. So they're down here in India, okay, at the Indus River, which is right here in the Indus River Valley, trying to get to the end of the world. Alexander is the heart of an explorer. He wants to get to the end of the world. Anyway, they're down here, and down there they have elephants, right? So the tribe that he's fighting, they have these elephants, and Alexander's cavalry will not come anywhere near them. He can't use his cavalry. So he teaches his army. This is apocryphal, meaning it's such a good story that it better be true. He teaches the front rank of his phalanx, when the elephant charges, to slide forward on their shields and stab upward into the elephant's belly. Because otherwise they're just going to get trampled. And they defeat the elephants, and the elephants run away screaming, and then Alexander wins again, because Alexander wins all the time. I do not have time to tell you about the story of Alexander taking the Malians, destroying the Malians, where the siege of the Malians is taking too long, and Alexander put a ladder up against the wall, climbed up the ladder himself, and jumped down inside the enemy city. Is a motivational technique. It worked. His men became motivated and destroyed the city. I do not have time to tell you about the mutiny against Alexander, where his troops are all like, we want to go home. We're tired of this. We're not going to do this. And Alexander comes out unarmed on a little platform and says, if you want to go home, fine. You're going to have to tell me to my face, and jumps down in the middle of a mutiny with no armor on. And of course it works, because everything works for this guy. He dies at 33. The death of Alexander is a mystery. Nobody knows exactly what happened. We have a timeline, but we don't know what, other than that he died. He was at a feast. He drank a lot. He did that. And sometimes he did nasty things to people when he drank. Alexander is not a good man, but Alexander is a great man. And there are good things about, my oldest son's name is Alexander. That is not a coincidence.
My brother's name is Alexander.
True story. We went to our very last doctor's appointment before the baby was supposed to be born, went to check with the midwife, make sure everything was fine. Okay? My wife and I are walking across the parking lot of this place, talking about what names we might give to our child. I was sure it was a boy, and if it was a boy, I wanted to name the child Alexander. My wife was kind of on the fence. There was this shiny thing on the ground in the parking lot. I reached down and picked it up, and it was a medallion with an imprint of Alexander the Great on it. I am not making this up. The debate ended right there. That's when the debate was over. And my wife said, yep, okay, Alexander it is. So then it was a boy, and we named him Alexander. He got a fever after this bout of drinking. He got a fever and never recovered from it. He died a couple of days later at the age of 33. His empire did not survive him. He had been slowly incorporating Persians into his empire in an effort to build a nation that would last for all time, a one-world nation, mixing the races and all kinds of stuff. His troops didn't like that very much, but he was Alexander, and so what are you going to do? He's Alexander. He can do whatever he wants. He may have died of alcohol poisoning. That is one of the possibilities. He may have died of poisoning. That is another one of the possibilities.
I'm sorry for your son.
I'm still sad about the death of Alexander the Great, and it happened in 330 BC. I was very young then. No, some of you are like,
Yeah.
what? You
You were
what?
like, you were still like 80 then, right?
I was extremely young then. Anyway, so he might have been poisoned. It might have been malaria. Might have been alcohol poisoning. See you, Evan. Always a pleasure, man. I'll see you in a couple weeks. But that he was one of the greatest military commanders of all time is not debatable. He was. And the lessons that I learned from reading about him and studying the things that he did and all of this stuff they're with me for a lifetime. For those of you who are looking for further reading on this subject, I have a couple books for you. Where's my Arian? Where's my Arian? Where did I put that?
I am Joshi.
Dude, turn off.
So cool. Fine.
Not cool. Okay, here are two of the better ones. The eyewitness account. Well, it's not an eyewitness account, but the closest thing we have to an eyewitness account was written by a guy named Arrian. Arrian is essentially the biographer of Alexander, and he wrote the campaigns of Alexander, which I strongly recommend to you. If you're looking for a novel treatment and you are old enough that a certain amount of sex and violence in your book does not bother you that much, I recommend The Virtues of War by Stephen Pressfield. I also recommend, this is much cleaner, Alexander the Great by Paul Cartledge. And a book that I just read yesterday, which is called The Blood of Achilles, which is a thickly researched and excellent book on the first days of the reign of Alexander the Great in Macedon.
What was the third book you mentioned?
The third one,
In something?
this one, Alexander the Great by Paul Cartledge. This is a very good book and not dense. Like it's a fast read, and it's got lots of pictures and stuff in it, lots of, stuff about the tombs and whatever. This is a pretty good book on that. Also, Plutarch, the Roman novelist, essentially, Plutarch wrote a book called The Life of Alexander, which has lots and lots of colorful anecdotes in it that are kind of fun. We don't really have time to talk about this. I was going to ask you, I did in fact ask you in my email to write to me about what you learn about Alexander from some of these stories, and what parts of his character would you like to make part of you, and what parts would you just as soon leave aside. I'm going to ask you guys to write about that. Look through the stuff that I sent you. Most of it's fairly readable. Some of it's a little dense, but most of it's fairly readable. And I think that it would serve you to do the reading and then think about what can you learn from this guy. Also, being that this is a homeschool community, I can say this and it will work. I am convinced that if Alexander the Great were born today, he would never have accomplished jack. Because undoubtedly, well, his father was a little weird, so maybe not. But undoubtedly, if they'd put him in public school, they would have diagnosed him with all sorts of weird attention deficit kinds of disorders and fed him drugs until he couldn't do anything anymore. The only chance that Alexander the Great would have had to become great is if he was homeschooled. That's the only chance. You are the kinds of people who can become great. I encourage you to learn about historical figures who did. Because I'm sorry, but really nobody else can teach you how to do that. Yeah, well, great is a dangerous thing. If you have to choose between being good and being great, choose to be good. Being great is dangerous and difficult and leads down strange roads that are difficult to find your way back from. But seriously, you have the capacity. Yeah, yes, Josie. Josie needs medication. Come on. Come on. That's insane. Don't you listen, Jose. Don't you listen. Not one word. They're wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. You are astonishing and fantastic just the way you are. Now become better. What? Uh-huh.
What?
Are you agreeing with me, Jetty?
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were.
Clearly, you know everything, Mr. C.
But I know more than I did yesterday. May that be true of you as well.
Yep.
Okay. With the fall of Alexander comes really the fall of Greece. His united empire will not outlive him. It will be broken up into pieces. He left a bunch of children. They're too young to really do much. Remember, Alexander died at 33, so his children were not very old. And the generals that he delegates power to and whatever are not able to hold his empire together. Nobody could be Alexander. Nobody could do what he did. And his empire will disintegrate. But that leads us to its successor. And the successor to the empire of Alexander the Great is what? The successor to the Alexander the Great is Rome. And with the death of Alexander, we have the rise of Rome. And now we get to talk about people like Cincinnatus, like Horatius, like Cloelia, like Regulus, like Caesar, like Mucius Scaevola.
I love Little Caesars. I love Caesar salad.
Neither of which have anything to do with Caesar, although a Caesarean section does. A C-section is a Caesarean section named after Caesar. This actual Caesar. Now, most of you will remember the reason that I'm actually teaching this class, which is a wild and crazy choose your own adventure interactive history lesson that I taught at the homeschool conference last year.
I wasn't there.
Remember that one-armed Joey? This is where poor Eliza lost her arm and became one-armed Joey. That interactive thing was about Caesar. Caesar and the pirates. Now I got to ask you guys a question. Right, okay, but most of you remember it. So I don't want to do it again when I come up there because you guys will cheat because you know how it's supposed to go.
I don't.
But some of you don't, and I would kind of like to. I got to figure out a way for us to do it together so that those of us who know how it works.
Here, make our choices have to be decided by a dice roll.
Okay, that's a possibility.
Doesn't that kind of
I'm going to grab my trick die.
That's a possibility. How many of you were not there and or you forgot?
your own adventure?
Okay, Abby and Josie.
Would still be fun though.
I can't remember whether Rachel was there or not.
Fun though. It's going to be.
No? I thought you might have been too young for that.
I missed it like right at the end. I had no idea what was going to happen.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Do not tell her, Eliza. We will lay traps.
And then we'll fail because Alexander.
Yeah. Taya's like way, way, way too into the diabolical possibilities here. Maybe we'll do another one. I have another one about Caesar as well. Caesar is. We won't get to Caesar for a little bit. Not next time. Well, wait. I guess it is. I guess we have to do the Roman Republic next time. We'll do Caesar when I get up there. Okay, so I'll figure something out with regard to that. There's going to be more reading in Rome. The Romans wrote a lot of stuff, and a lot of it is very valuable to read. So there's going to be more reading in Rome. Do the actual reading, people. Do the actual reading. If I ask you to write. If I ask you to read. Will you do that for me? Okay. All right. You are excused if you would like to go and do something else. If you don't want to go and do something else, you don't have to.
I can preach the Bible to you guys. I
love
haven't finished my
I love
chapter
preaching.
yet.